wastewater and composting toilets, and I'm also a worm composter.
I'm also a city councilor.
You guys want to introduce yourself? I'm Alicia Ralph. I'm a member of the ReUse Committee.
Jessica Tanner.
Move over here. We're just going to leave the board accessible for Ian.
This one?
Yeah.
That part?
Nope, that one. So he can write on it.
Jessica Tanner. I'm also on the ReUse Committee here in Northampton.
Have one more. We're doing a round of introductions. And it's your turn.
All right, great. Jeff Weeks.
He's on the ReUse Committee as well.
Okay, is that everybody?
Who knows? Let's pretend.
Okay, well, again, thank everyone else for coming. Just to give you a little background, I know some of you may be familiar with what we're proposing and some of you may not be. So what Harvest Power tries to do is to help with organic materials recovery and recycling. So our facilities, generally there's various types, but we would like to take the organic portion of what now is generally considered trash. And in Massachusetts this currently goes to a landfill or in some cases incinerators. And we would like to remove that portion from that stream and make renewable energy out of it. And then what's left over is generally either converted to compost or fertilizer. And in doing so, we can offer these services at generally less than what is currently the current waste disposal option. And the renewable energy, depending on who's the user is, can save people money on electricity as well. So that's the short end of it. The little history of this is that I went to UMass, so I spent a lot of years out here in Western Mass. And when I started with the company, I was generally intrigued by perhaps doing something out here, just because maybe I wanted to spend more time out here, or you know, plus I thought the area I knew had a general sense of environmentalism that I thought would be conducive or helpful to getting a project like this off the ground. I had also read that Northampton had some experience some time ago with separating their organics and trying to do a system, not with this technology, but just to get it out of the landfills and to do composting. So that made me think, well, you know, if they have this experience and if they want to do this, then maybe there's a place for Harvest out here. So we reached out to Jim, and we've only had, you know, one or two very brief conversations about the possibility of siting a facility within Northampton. And then within those conversations, the idea of being at the landfill site came up. We're not wedded to the landfill site. You know, if there are other sites in town that are conducive to what we need, we're certainly open to them. We're also looking at sites in other towns, and we're still doing, you know, a lot of diligence on our part to find out where the best place is going to be. And City Councilor, to your point, I certainly did not try to have this a little secret meeting. We want to be very transparent and open, and anytime you want us to come back and have an auditorium full of residents, that's fine with us.
I thank you.
Okay, we tend to be kind of proud of what we're doing, so we're not trying to shove anything down anyone's throat or hide anything. So, and this was just to come back at Jim's invitation to kind of give a little proposal to a bigger audience and see what you guys thought and what your concerns might be, and that's kind of it for at least initially.
I can jump up, and I was going to give just a brief sort of overview of our approach, if that's okay with you guys.
You're great.
Usually we do this for presentations, but since we have a big group, I'll just start. Kaliana, you mentioned something that was key to what our approach is, and that's taking core waste and turning it into a resource. Right? That's our goal. But there's a lot of different types of waste in there. Here we've sort of touched on the first big one, which is municipal solid waste. Okay? And there's a big organic fraction to that, but then there's also inerts, or what we'll call trash. There's also other municipal waste from the treatment plant, and that's sludge, right? That's a biology. There's also grease from pump stations, right? Anything else from you can think of, Jim? There's sludge, there's grease, there's others. And then there's sort of commercial residential waste, right? And that's the trash section, but there's also food waste. And then industries have their own waste. What we're interested in is organic waste, like Coke plants or beverage waste, milk, dairy products, anything like that. So that's another organic waste source. So basically, what we want to do is pick these off. And instead of going to landfill or going to somewhere else, we want to use whatever we can out of this waste stream to make energy. And not only energy, but also fertilizer. Dave mentioned fertilizer is our byproduct, among others. This is what we typically make. It's a dry, granular product. It's a really good fertilizer for... yeah, I can pass it around. And it's better than synthetic because it's organic, it's low release. Makes a very good fertilizer product. So basically, we want to pick off anything that can make energy. So on the organic side, we want the organic fraction of municipal solid waste. We don't want the trash. Wastewater treatment plant sludge is great. There's hundreds of thousands of treatment plants that have digesters across the U.S. and in Europe. And we'll mimic that process. Grease is great too. Grease is actually rocket fuel for a digester. And I'll explain why in a second. And then food waste is great stuff too. And then on the industry side, their organics will take as well. So basically, what will happen is all this stuff will be funneled somehow to a facility that we're hoping to build. And the first step is to take everything and sort it out. So I'll call that receiving. So we have all these sources coming in, and there's a bit of processing that needs to happen. Specifically with the food waste and the organics from municipal solid waste stream. That stuff comes in, they call it source separated, but a lot of the time there's other inerts, there's plastics, there's glass, there's rocks, there's stuff that has to be separated out before we can use it in our facility. So that's what happens here. There's pre-processing. But once we get things processed into a consistent sort of feedstock, basically the anaerobic digestion process takes over. Now, is anyone familiar with anaerobic digestion? A few of you. Now, basically, this has been going on at farms for quite a while. Farms have been anaerobically digesting manure and other materials, basically to reduce the volume and then apply it onto their fields. This process basically mimics what's going on in our stomachs. It's the same thing, same bacteria. And the key is that the bacteria actually exist in the wastewater treatment plant sludge. So we'll take all these materials and we'll feed it into these tanks, right? Show a couple pumps here. So these are our 80 tanks. And what happens is, when you seed it with this biology in the treatment plant sludge, it breaks down all these organic materials into carbon residue. which we call digestate, right? That's the solid fraction. But then there's the gas fraction. During the breakdown of all this organic material, it produces carbon dioxide and methane. And methane is what we use to produce the power. So we'll take the solid residual and then make the stuff that's going around, we pass it around, that becomes fertilizer. And then the methane becomes power and then heat. And that's done through what's called cogeneration, combined heat and power. Basically, you take methane, which is a fuel, and fuel generators. You fuel engines, engine generators. And the generators produce power, electricity we can use at the treatment plant, or wherever you have loads, electricity loads, or we can put it back on the grid. But then we can recover the heat that's generated during that electricity production process and use that heat in our facility to heat our tanks, and then wherever else you have a heat load. So with all these feedstocks, all these formerly waste sources, now they become resources, and these are our byproducts. So, and the process itself, it can seem very complex, but it really isn't. It's basically just putting waste in a tank, and biology take over, and just maintaining the temperature and flows and that sort of thing. So it's simple once you boil it down. That's sort of the overall goal here. It's to take all these waste streams and produce these two things. Now there's going to be waste streams from our facility as well. Right? So we do all this, and there is some residual liquids that are left over, and that has to be treated. So there is a wastewater stream, albeit a small one. And our approach is to treat that to a point. Side stream treatment is what we call it. We pull it off, and we'll treat it to a point, and then we'll discharge it to a treatment plant. And then the other byproduct, I think, is rejects or innards. And that comes from this side. So when we're receiving all our feedstocks, processing and pulling out the stuff that we can't use in our process, that piles up a little bit. And, that's mostly plastics, it's glass, bone, it's rocks, all inerts that we can't use in our process. So that will go to a landfill if it can't be reused, and then we'll have a small wastewater stream. That's basically it. Does anyone have any questions? MJ?
Odor. I don't see odor as
Odor. Yeah, odor. That's the other one. So odor is at our facility are really on the front end and then on this back end. And you have odors on the front end because you have all these waste streams that are already breaking down and they're just smelly. Treatment plant sludge, you get food waste coming in, it's in trucks, it's open, usually we tip it into the big receiving pit, so there's an odor source there. And we have odor control systems that'll pull air from our receiving stations and then from the back end over the treatment digestate. Send it all to a biofilter or a wet scrubber. There's different package systems that can take care of the whole thing.
So that's all indoors?
Yes, this will always, the pre-processing, the receiving end is indoors. And then we'll pull the foul air from the reception hall or from the pits, reception pits specifically. But every facility we've built so far, designed, odors are our number one, I guess, the driving factor for us to sort of pull everything together. And there's package systems that take care of odors. And there's a variety of different ways to approach it. For a facility in Orlando that's in design right now, odors were actually the driving factor for the whole project. They have a composting facility that generates quite a bit of odors, and they're very close to a big theme park in Orlando. And so they wanted to get rid of their odors. Their driver wasn't renewable energy or using waste as a resource. It was, we have a smelly system to get rid of our waste. We need something that's better. So our main focus at first for that design was odor control, taking care of that through a package system. But here, you're right, odors are definitely a concern. So we have odors on the front end, odors on the back end. But the process itself, because they're in sealed tanks, there's no odors generated. Or the odors, I should say, the odors are captured in the process, and they never leave. They'll end up in the gas stream, which ends up going to the generators and being combusted.
So in your proposal, I noticed that, I think Waste Management, which is a local waste collector, is on your board, and you work with Waste Management. Would you also work with other waste suppliers in our area?
Oh, yes, yeah. Waste Management, the relationship, they've invested in the company, but we're not really connected at any kind of operational level. You know, they don't control us in any way, and we don't necessarily have to work with them exclusively. It's just...
But that would be a potential source of...
Yeah, I mean, we would want to work with all the haulers, really, because it's in our best interest to get as much of it as we can.
In reviewing the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's report on organic management, they had made a recommendation that to be successful processing facility, you couldn't just stay in this one small area, you have to reach out. So you'd have to be getting organics from Hamden as well as Hampshire County to make it a viable thing. So I'm just, if you agree with that, and then what does that mean for the amount of trucks driving through residential areas? I mean, the Northampton landfill is not off of a highway. It is through communities. It's through East Hampton. It's not an easy way to get to. So you're talking about trucks filled with food waste, those odors that they carry, and we're talking about a lot of trucks coming in. And potentially also they're talking about the Boston area wanting to ship their organics out west as well. So my concerns, of course, is the carbon footprint of all these trucks coming in to a location that's not the most, easy to get to area.
Before you respond, can I just say the report that we issued did not include municipal solid waste. We only looked at food waste in the 12 communities at the core of Hampshire County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That.
Okay. Yes, it would, to make this cost effective for us, it would have to be regional. And when I say regional, we've looked at, say, the I-91 corridor. We don't think, we have no plans to ship waste in as far as Boston. Part of our cost savings comes from reducing that transportation cost that you've referred to, and also that results in less emissions as well. Currently, a lot of the stuff is being shipped fairly far away. I'm not quite sure what the Northampton treatment plant does, but many of them either ship it to Vermont or Connecticut right now. So the environmental impact would be, we feel, is less from the transportation costs. As far as truck traffic goes, you're right, it's not near a highway, and in that sense, it's not the perfect space. To give you some of an idea of truck traffic, it's a little difficult at this point because we'd have to imagine the size of the facility, but for sake of argument, let's call it a 40,000 ton facility, which would serve from here to Springfield. With that, if you're open 5 days a week, for all year, you start dividing that. The trucks that would normally come in would hold about 20 tons. So when you start doing the math, that comes out to about 8 trucks a day. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that. It could be 6 to, say, 15. But that gives you, a little bit of a range as far as what the truck traffic would be. And we understand that that's the chief concern for the people around the neighborhood.
Yes, I want to echo with what Mimi Odgers just talked about, especially the truck traffic. I have great concerns being a city councilor and representing all the residents around the whole perimeter of the landfill on the odor part of it. I mean, because of the odors that occurred at that landfill, there was a lawsuit that was placed in the city of Northampton on a nuisance of odor, okay? And we ended up paying $1.2 million, the city did, for 2 houses, plus we still have 3 more on the books.
Right.
So I have great concerns on the amount of odor that would be produced out of that landfill.
Okay. And just sorry.
Yeah, compared to a landfill, I mean, the landfill, the problem is you have migrating gases. I mean, you can put in a gas extraction system on a landfill, but you're not going to capture everything. So essentially, you're going to have some loss of gases, specifically H2S. And that happens. That happens in every landfill. Some are higher than others. But with this process, we don't have an uncontrolled system. You know, we have, this will be indoors, this will be indoors, and we'll have odor control to specifically target, you know, the sources in each system, in each part of the facility. Whereas in a landfill, I mean, the only thing you do with a landfill is put a big bubble over it and capture all the air. It's odor control from the approach we would use here on the landfill just wouldn't work. That is a big concern of ours. I mean, every facility we approach, odors are the community's #1 concern.
But just to expand on that a little bit, like you mentioned, the project in Orlando, they were so concerned about it that we've set up a lot of systems to safeguard it. And as the city is the landholder, whatever contractual arrangement, or I mean, you can emphasize that as much as you want, and we would have to meet your standards.
Right.
So we're not necessarily in control. The town would be if you agreed. You know, we would set up a lease, and just like any other lease, you could set the terms of that.
I wanted to speak for a minute. We're getting into a lot of good questions and details about Harvest Power's proposal, and that's great. What I hope to do is just to jump in for a minute and provide a little bit of background about why they're here and some of the initiatives to just set kind of the bigger picture before we can certainly take a lot of other questions that folks may have. But we were, you know, I was approached by Harvest Power a couple of times to come in. They were interested in speaking to the city about hosting a project within the community. They wanted to talk to me a little bit about that. We've shared some information and data with them. We invited them to speak to this particular subcommittee, which is dealing with solid waste diversion issues within the community. So we felt like it was a good first step for them to come in and talk about what the proposal would be, the types of projects that they're involved in. And there's really a number of factors that are creating a good environment for companies like Harvest Power. There are statewide initiatives on organics waste management diversion, upcoming food waste bans that are going to be implemented by DEP. There's a lot of incentives for renewable energy projects. So there's a lot of statewide incentives, statewide policies that are making the economic environment for companies like Harvest to do successful projects. It's a very good environment for projects like this. So that's sort of in part why we're hearing from them now. We also have the community has a landfill that's closing. We're also grappling with what we're going to do with the waste, and that's a lot of the work that this committee is doing in terms of diversion and programs and how we're going to deal with things like food waste or other organic materials within the community. So there's a number of factors that are coming together, and it's really the ideal time to have the conversation, which is why we had Harvest Power come in. We've actually been approached by other companies that have similar technology, similar ideas. So that was one of the reasons that we had them come in. I think the other issue is that it's a community-wide discussion that's necessary to deal with organic waste diversion within the community. This is not a project that the Department of Public Works or the Board of Public Works or anyone is endorsing at this point. I think it's basically fact-finding about what a project like this would entail, what a company like Harvest Power is about, what the different factors are involved, the questions that people have, and then it would need to be a citywide decision. Harvest Power has been kind enough to come in and explain a lot of good information for us here today. Ultimately, if the city as a whole decided to move forward with this type of project, the city would need to issue a request for proposals and get both qualification information from companies like Harvest Power and economic information on what the benefits to the city would be, both in terms of dollars and cents, but also in terms of our ability to remove organic matter from our waste stream that we're dealing with in different ways now, some of them that involve long hauls and other people may view as non-sustainable manners in the way that we're dealing with material. So it would be sort of a request for proposals type of situation where companies would propose a project and then would be reviewed by the city, and ultimately a firm would be selected if that's the way that the city decided that they wanted to move forward. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. There's a lot of reasons why things are coming together. It is a city decision. I guess the last thing is it's really, this is a development project that could be viewed as an economic development project from the city's perspective, in addition to a very intelligent way, I think, of dealing with organics waste diversion. So those are the factors that led to the meeting today. And if folks have other questions, I'm sure that Ian and David would be happy to entertain those.
Actually, I have a question for you. So when you say it's a city decision, who actually makes the decision?
Well, it's not something that I think it would probably start with the board.
Board of Public Works.
With the Board of Public Works. But ultimately, I don't know, the city council or the mayor. I mean, clearly, I don't think the department or the board is going to take on a project of this magnitude, I would think, without a larger discussion.
And I do think that we are just in a very preliminary fact-finding, learning about this as a possibility. Clearly, we have a landfill that's closing down that has a site assignment already, so there's clearly some interest in it. Our question as the Board of Public Works, or I'll speak as my member, being a member of the Board of Public Works, is what do we do with this asset now that we're going to be closing it up, and how do we minimize the costs that we're going to have to incur to maintain that site, and are there other opportunities for revenue streams that also meet some other community goals that we're looking to achieve?
I think that this would qualify as a heavy public use and would require a special permit by the City Council. You're talking about building, what's the sort of acreage that you need for these buildings? And
Generally, 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm. And how tall are the tanks? And how big are the buildings in general?
Tanks can be, a lot of times we deal with height restrictions. So, I mean, we can change the dimensions.
Well, just in general.
In general, I don't know, 40 to 50 feet.
40 to 50 feet high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there'll be a lot of considerations in terms of building permits, zoning, and the special permit from the City Council that you'd have to go through. But be that as it may, that's a discussion for another day. So I wondered, in the sites that you have put these plants in, what is the distance usually between the operation and the residential homes in general?
It varies. As you kind of mentioned, the one in Orlando isn't really near a home, it's just near a lot of tourists. And we have our other facility in the Vancouver region is in a fairly densely neighborhood. This is an urban area. I'm not exactly sure how far the nearest neighbor is, but it's well within, there's hundreds of thousands of people within just the surrounding area.
But I mean, actually, the distance
The
between
actual setback?
the site, that's right, and residential homes.
I'm not positive of that, but I can certainly get you that information.
The problem with this particular location is that the homes are crowded right into that site.
Mm-hmm.
Some are within 500 feet of the site that you're, yes, you probably will, view the site if it becomes a serious consideration.
Yeah, we took a travel over there.
Right. So that's something I think when you're looking at this site, that's a really huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
In the Vancouver area, is that in a area zoned for, what kind of zoning is in that area?
Yeah, it's part of our, we had an existing very large composting operation there. Mm-hmm. And then we added the facility like this. So, I'm sorry, this...
What is the zoning?
Oh,
and
yes.
What's the
I believe it was
residential
probably zoned an agricultural use, maybe, because of the existing composting site.
Mm-hmm. London is too.
Yeah. And
we have another project in London, Ontario. It's in an agricultural area.
Agricultural area.
Yeah.
And then Orlando just happens to be at the treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
They have additional acreage that we're taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of factors that come into play when we're choosing the site.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have these waste streams, wastewater stream, the ability to send that to a wastewater treatment plant in the easiest way possible, that's a huge factor.
Mm-hmm.
So co-locating in a treatment plant works out because of that.
Mm-hmm.
The other factor that comes into play is what do we do with our electricity? If there's no loads, if there's no, users around, that means we have to send the electricity either back to the grid or pretty far to the ultimate user. So co-locating at a treatment plant or some industrial area that could use our electricity right there, or being close to the grid, is another big factor when we're choosing the site. And the residential, obviously, close proximity to the residents because of truck traffic and because of concerns with odors. Even though we say we control the odors, there's always concern. So.
What about the,
Excuse me,
sure.
You've had your hand up for a while.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay,
No.
all right, go ahead.
Although I am concerned. So are you going to build a generator there?
We'll
A
have
generator plant in addition to this plant?
Yeah, so when we have the methane, when we capture the methane, we'll typically put in gen sets, I'll call them. And they're not very big. I mean, the largest one I've seen so far is probably as big as this room. And they house the generators, they'll house the heat recovery system, and all the electrical components, like the switchgear, things to take the heat and send it where it needs to go and to take the electricity.
There's quite a lot of buildings there. And I guess one of the things that will come up if this proceeds any further is there were significant noise problems with the Amoresco generating plant, which captures methane from the landfill.
From the gen sets? Is it noise?
I'm not sure of maybe Jim can speak to that. Are they using gen sets or what kind of methodology? Yeah.
Huh.
So.
Okay. Yeah, because noise control in the enclosure, that's usually a specification that we have control over. So noise reduction is always a part of
I
the
think it's
design.
because the houses are so close there.
Yeah.
You've got kids playing in backyards there.
Right.
And the last thing I want to say before it slips through the neurons of my brain is the sludge you're talking about, that's human feces, right?
Right. Yep.
So, and you couldn't eliminate the sludge and just do food compost. You would actually need to have sludge.
No, we could. We would, we can use any of these feedstocks, but we need to seed it with some bacteria.
Yeah, well, sludge, of course, is a problem, not only with odors, but with E. coli and other bacteria. And so that really has to be handled quite carefully from a public health point of view.
Right.
But you would take...
Could you let him respond?
To that point,
Sure.
That's the great thing about the anaerobic digestion process, is that it breaks down pathogens and it stabilizes the biosolids. So we couldn't, this fertilizer has been through the anaerobic digestion process. We couldn't sell this, we couldn't do anything with it unless we treated it through the digestion and actually broke down pathogens and reduced pathogens. There's an EPA limit that we have to follow, and we have to meet through this process to be able to sell that stuff. And the drying, so what we also do, I didn't mention this, is after you break down the organics in the digestion process and produce your methane, you have the solid residual, but then we put it through a drying process. So we take a liquid, say 6%, when I say 6%, it's mostly, it's a liquid. We'll take that, we'll thicken it up through equipment, and then we'll send it to a dryer, and we'll take it all the way to this stuff. So that extra step further reduces pathogens to what EPA considers the highest level of quality, which is Class A.
But that's at the end.
Jessica?
Yeah. But before that, it's all a closed, it's a completely closed process.
Except for us to get there.
Through pipes. Right.
No, it's truck there.
Oh, here, yeah, right there it's raw.
There you go.
Well, it's being trucked through town now.
Where does it go? Where does
It goes to a landfill in Vermont.
Oh, we send our sludge from Northampton to Vermont.
But this would be other people's sludge coming into Northampton. You'd be getting sludge from Springfield, right?
Depends.
No, when I said that was more, I'm hoping to get food waste from all those towns. Yeah, I mean, there'd be a ratio, which certainly we could discuss with the town moving forward. But when I said Springfield, I intended it more to be of the food, so supermarkets coming from Springfield.
Because you need a broader supply of the food waste and the organic aspect compared to the sludge supply.
Yeah, I mean, all these materials, from our point of view, have currently have what's called a tip fee, a disposal fee to get rid of. So from the energy aspect, I'm not sure it really matters what the composition is.
Well, that's a good point, Dave. These do vary in their energy potential, what we call volatile solids. So food waste and grease, they're very, very high in volatile solids. They break down pretty easily. Sludge is high, not as high as food waste and grease, but pretty high. But I mean, we can essentially build a plant with any of these. It just depends on how much is available in the area. Like you said, we don't want to be reaching to Boston, having trucks come all the way from Boston to Northampton or wherever we site this facility. That just makes no sense. That's a huge carbon footprint. And we think there's enough material in this area through treatment plant sludge, especially food waste with the universities here. There's a lot of potentials. There's a lot of organic waste that we could use. But there's no set formula. You know, we could trade in one or the other. But you do need to seed it. And that seeding is a very small amount just to get the biology going.
Jessica and then MJ.
And then Owen. Okay, you had your hand up though.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
So in terms of the the final compost product, I'm just wondering about, I mean, in some states, the sludge is actually considered hazardous. It would be a hazardous waste.
Right.
So, and I know that, as far as I know, these old wastewater treatment facilities aren't able to capture all the pharmaceuticals that are going down into, and so what about all the pharmaceuticals that are going into this process, as well as, so if you're capturing, you know, lawn material, some people put pesticides and herbicides on their lawn, so what happens to all of the pesticides, herbicides that are going in pharmaceuticals that are ending up in the compost?
That actually, we won't take yard waste. That's a different.
You don't do yard waste?
Not really, because it doesn't break down as well. That's a different design approach. But I come from the wastewater field, and pharmaceutical products and personal care products are sort of an emerging field right now. And that's more of a concern on the wastewater side. Not so much, it doesn't make its way to the solid fraction, to my knowledge. But it can make its way into the wastewater side. So essentially if we do have that in the sludge, that's where it'll end up. There's studies right now, I mean, I could go on and on about personal care products. There's studies right now saying that some activated sludge processes break that down, some don't. There's pass-through. That's sort of an unknown right now. But we haven't been able to measure those compounds enough to know how much it impacts the human body. There's studies on fish and things of that nature, but that won't be a concern of ours in our solid product, our fertilizer.
And that is, both the EPA and the Mass DEP have pretty strict regulations about once you digest it, the sludge is called biosolids, and it's something that we would obviously adhere to, all of the relevant regulations, and it's something that's fairly common. The Deer Island plant in Boston takes all the biosolids and then it sells it as fertilizer.
Right. So. And we've mentioned compost, and then we've mentioned this material too. This isn't compost. This is dried product. So when we have this solid residual, right, there's different things we can do with it. So what I'm showing you here is, let's see, solid. I'll just say digestate reuse, right? And I'm probably going to mention some things that folks don't really like, so you can speak up. So with the digestate, which is essentially liquid, there's plenty of reuse opportunity. What we're doing here is dried fertilizer. Right. But we can also take that liquid and thicken it and then compost, which a lot of digester facilities in the U.S. do. You can also land apply it. You can skip, if you have the right temperature and time control in your digester, you can skip that whole drying process and produce material that's land applicable. Now there's different opinions on that. Some communities allow it. Some folks love it, some folks are really concerned about it, but that's not our goal here. We're going right here with the dried fertilizer. And we do have compost facilities. Harvest Power owns quite a few of them, so that might be an avenue in the future, but for right now, that's not our plan. Our plan is to dry it and to make this dried product. And because we have this dried product, it's also a lot easier to haul around. Instead of having a liquid, which is a much greater volume, we have this dried product, which is significantly less volume.
And
so
what
it
is
takes
that
less
used
trucks.
for? What is that used for?
This is fertilizer, so a lot of times citrus groves, golf courses will use this on their greens or on their fairways. It's a slow release organic fertilizer.
You have an end-user relationship.
We do. We do, yeah.
So that won't be sold in the community, or it's not intended to be sold in the community?
Not right now. I mean, we haven't gone as far as doing market studies around the area to see if we can sell it. That's sort of our next step. But we do have a relationship with, it's a Harvest, it's a fertilizer company.
Garden Pro.
Garden Pro.
They're
Yeah.
more mid-Atlantic right now.
Right.
They do bagged products and sell to homeowners.
Right.
So that may be something in the future, but again, we haven't done a market research in the area yet. You know, it's still a little early for that.
Say our landfill site was not available, would you still be interested in the greater Northampton area to site a facility? And can you talk about what you'd be looking for in terms of siting criteria?
Yeah, I mean, we are. I don't think it's any secret. We've reached out to Amherst and East Hampton, and we are looking. You know, a perfect site, like I said, we need 3 to 5, 2 to 6 acres. A perfect site, yeah, is near a highway. I mean, we're not looking to disturb anyone. A perfect site would have a large energy user right next to it, because I don't know if this has shown up in anyone's electric bill, but the price of electricity has gone way down recently because of natural gas prices, which is generally a good thing, but it makes it a little more difficult for renewables. So it's a little better for us to be able to sell to someone what's called behind the meter. And then obviously we need to be in an area where there's feedstocks. So, and it's not just the density of feedstocks, but it's also a willingness to sort of embrace this. This is eventually taking another step in how you sort of dispose of your waste. There aren't a lot of residential programs in the U.S. right now. Most of them are on the West Coast. Within Massachusetts, I believe the town of Hamilton has started a kind of a pilot program for residential organic waste. So we just, that, like I said initially, one of the reasons we came out to Northampton is because we saw some time ago you guys had been interested in doing something like that.
Thank you.
And, okay, so I didn't see.
I think Alan was
Okay, Al. And then you, and
Have you done any projections at all as to income that will be generated to the city?
Not specific numbers. I can tell you roughly we would hope if the town, if everyone was comfortable with taking the treatment plant sludge, that's a fairly expensive operation, and you know, like you said, he's shipping it to Vermont. We think we could save the town money on that. There's the potential, as far as I know, at a landfill, if the town owns a landfill, and I don't recall the name of the term, but we're looking, the city of Bourne down on Cape Cod has a similar situation where they have a closed landfill. They put out an RFP, and if the town owns the landfill, then there's a way where essentially you would get a cut. The city would get a fee for every ton that comes into the facility at a closed landfill. And then there may be the possibility, even though there's no electricity sites at the landfill, there's something in Massachusetts called virtual net metering, and we still have to look into that, but there may be an option where if we can sell, it has to be 100% of the electricity we produce. If we can sell it to the town, I think that would save the city money as well. So there's a few different ways, and then there's, I don't know if the city controls its waste itself, it's other waste, not the sludge, or if that's just contracted to all the haulers. But it may result in a trickle down of lower disposal fees, just for the rest of the waste. But no specific numbers, no, we haven't gotten into that yet.
We're starting to crank or calculate numbers. We've got some sludge numbers from the Gina's provided from the treatment plant here in Northampton. We have numbers from surrounding communities. We're trying to get a better handle on available organic waste, food waste, other industrial sources as well. So we're starting to build the model, but we haven't.
And you have an idea, you referred to some numbers as to the capacity of the plant you're talking about.
Yeah, there's generally a minimum for which it makes sense for us, or it allows us to do something like this, and that minimum is roughly 25,000 to 30,000 tons per year. This is all very fluid. As I said, you know, electricity prices go down, but on the other hand, if Massachusetts, or when they enact their organics ban, maybe tip fees go up. And there's currently a new energy bill in the Massachusetts legislation about renewables and this thing I call net metering, and that may change the equation a little bit. But generally speaking, that's the size that, in most cases, we're comfortable at a minimum. As far as maximum, there really isn't any, but I don't think people want us pushing the maximum. So.
What type of energy does that, how much electricity does that generate?
Well, again, depending on size, but we would say if it was a 40,000 ton, 2 megawatts, something around there.
That would be, just really quick, is 100. That's probably less than a megawatt.
Okay, so
All
between 1 and 2 megawatts would probably be the size of our facility. And that depends a lot on, as Ian said, the composition of, or the recipe, so to speak, of what's coming into the facility.
And there's different uses for the gas too. We just, in the Northeast or areas that have high electricity prices, the best thing to do is, especially where it's cold, you produce power, you put it back on the grid, and then you get heat because you're in a cold area, so reusing the heat from the process is key. In Seattle, though, we have a different approach. We're taking the methane and possibly doing compressed natural gas, and we're doing fleet vehicle fuel. So there's different ways to use that fuel, depending on which region. But for this region, typically we'll go with cogen fired internal combustion engines.
Oh, wait, no, this person and then
I've got several questions. I'll start with one. You talked about the municipal solid waste being your starter organisms for the anaerobic digestion.
Yeah, sludge.
The sludge.
Yeah.
Is there any other source of those organisms for starters that you know of that would be as effective?
You can seed a digester with primary effluent, so from a treatment plant. You don't necessarily need the solid. You can grab it from the wastewater stream, the liquid stream. But other than that, I mean, you can, if there's like a food waste digester or a non-biosolids digester, we could grab the seed material from that. Any digester we can grab seed material from. We'll need a couple truckloads, 1,000 gallons here, 1,000 gallons there to build up the biology. But usually, the easiest way to do it is to use treatment plant sludge because it's right.
Is it a specific set of organisms that you require for that process?
Yeah, there's a bunch. There's acetogens, pathogens, there's a whole community of bacteria that they're working to process. Some folks...
But isolated but specific to anaerobic, so you could use an aerobic bacteria starter.
Right, they're all anaerobic bacteria, exactly. And what we would do too is acclimate the bacteria to the different feedstocks we have. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what you don't want to do is, I've seen some approaches do this and not work. The reason for doing this, not only do we remove contaminants, but we homogenize the feed to these tanks. Because if you're feeding it a normal meal, so to speak, and then you hit it with something they're not used to, like a high molecular weight grease, it won't like it. It'll have trouble breaking it down, and they can go sour. The process can go sour.
So you need to have a recipe.
You need to have a recipe, and you need to have control of that recipe and control of the process.
So it's like digestion, so it's sort of like you eat something that you're not accustomed to and you get a bellyache.
Exactly, yeah. Like you go to McDonald's, you have a high grease diet.
What's that? What's the front to back timeline on the process?
Well, depending on your temperature, this is the big bottleneck. This can be anywhere from 10 days hydraulic residence time, so that's how long the solids will actually stay there, all the way up to 20 in the mid-20s. the higher temperature you go, the lower, the shorter time it was to stay in the tanks.
And you can control the temperature?
Yes. We run, we'll take material or liquid from the tanks and run it through the heat exchangers continuously. And then we'll insulate the tanks, prevent heat loss that way. And then the back end is it's just, the dryer takes 6 hours and can process quite a bit of material depending on the size of the dryer.
Okay, so now it's,
Okay, I'm a resident who lives near this landfill, so is that the only place you're looking at? Or, I mean, in Northampton? Is that the best place that, I mean, that's the most
from a-
feasible place at this point?
At least as far as we know, and if other people have ideas, we'll check it out.
Okay, because I'm, you know, I have my family has lived through all the odors, all the promises. I mean, my anxiety level now is like sky high. I'm just so afraid that somebody's going to be in there, and we're going to have odors again, lots of truck traffic, toxins released into the air that will severely affect people's health. And I know you guys are saying, okay, you know, I can assure you that that's not going to happen, but we heard that before in our area. And it's been terrible. I mean, it directly affects the quality of life when you put a landfill in a residential area and you run it. So I would not, you know, personally, I don't want you there.
Okay. No.
I mean, that's my personal opinion, but
That's fine.
speaking as a resident of Ward 6.
Did it make sense, the differences that we pointed out?
I mean, you can tell me, you know, like the sky is green or blue or whatever you want to say, but
Right,
and
so
once you get in there and it starts and the odors start and the sludge is going down the street, what are we going to do?
Right.
I mean, we're going to be in the same situation we were in before when all these promises were made to the residents in our area, and thank God there was this initiative that went out and the people said, close it down. It's crazy to have a landfill in a residential area. I mean, it just makes no sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the benefit that we have is that we've actually seen these facilities in Europe and the U.S. So we have firsthand, you know, we've been there.
Well,
But
fine,
you-
but do it in somebody else's neighborhood, that's my
No, but
opinion.
what I'm saying is
People
that,
of Ward 6 have
yeah,
had it.
You guys don't have that advantage. So maybe, if this moves forward at all in the future, maybe part of the comfort or getting comfortable with the process before you move forward with anything is to actually see one of these. You know what I mean?
Where is the
That might
closest
help.
one?
The closest food waste, well, there's plenty of, there's digesters around Massachusetts. They're on the big plant in Boston, it's not Boston, it's in Everett. Closest to,
One up in Westminster, Vermont, the dairy farm.
yeah, that's actually pretty close. And then how far is Essex Junction? Is that?
45 minutes from here.
Okay.
It's just off Putney.
That has a similar sort of digestion approach to what we'd be doing. They're more on the municipal sludge side and less on the food waste side, but it's a similar
Yeah, when I hear sludge, I just think, oh my God,
okay,
here we go
I have
again.
other questions and we're almost out of time.
You've had sludge out there before.
I've actually been researching digesters for some time, and recently found a company in the UK that's selling, that's actually promoting these to like moderate-sized businesses and like small communities.
Right.
And they're selling a whole digester in a 40-foot shipping container. They're scaled down to, I think, half-ton to 5-ton a week size.
Right.
Have you considered manufacturing something like this for smaller town use, so as to actually more localize, thus eliminating the distribution effect? It's like you
So it'd be
could locate something like that
decentralized.
at a transfer station in every town in Massachusetts.
Yeah, like a decentralized sort of
Exactly.
digestion. That actually, folks in Africa community, they're taking their own manure and doing that on their own. They have small little digesters and they're making cooking fuel. The problem with going the small scale on the side is that because it's a natural process and it relies on biology, you don't have a very large system to play with. So if something goes wrong, it's easier to lose that biology, therefore losing your process. If it's a lot bigger, you build a bigger biomass, so if things go wrong, it's got some buffer, and it can handle it. Say part of its community dies off or something, well, you still have a whole biomass to work with. So on the small scale, that's the risk you run, is it?
But in terms of inoculating, you figure out ways of maintaining culture.
Yeah,
Then you
yeah,
inoculate
but you just
with-
have a bigger culture, a bigger,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But we haven't, it's not economical for us to go that
Yeah.
small at this point.
But in terms of spreading it out, and also, you mentioned producing electricity versus compressed natural gas, and I work for a small nonprofit, and we only spend $5,000 a year on electricity. We spend $17,000 a year on propane.
Yeah,
So
if
the
we
price of electricity versus propane is actually quite different.
Yes, propane is, if we were competing, yeah, and because the problem with the natural gas, and we would certainly look into it at this, you know, out here, is that it generally as a transportation fuel, so you would need the vehicles. I mean, the PVTA has, I think, a couple of natural gas buses, but they've started buying these kind of diesel hybrid things. So, and I'm not sure how much more vehicles in this area are out here. In other parts of the country, like the West Coast, there's quite a few, and there's a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but a lot of natural gas stations where you can actually pull up, because a lot of municipalities, their vehicles, taxi fleets, things like that. So if there was a market for it, we would have nothing.
I think it's used mostly as a heating and cooking fuel.
Yeah.
Isn't it directly substitutable for propane, I think?
There's some differences.
If you treat it, it's pretty much equivalent. And
Yeah.
Slightly lower BTUs.
Right.
There are projects like this where you can treat the gas, you treat it as pipeline,
Yeah.
like a pipeline natural gas. And I think when the city issued a request for proposals for the landfill gas to energy project at the landfill, there was one developer that was looking at pipeline quality to get the gas at the Smith College to use it for their cogen facility there. So.
Yeah, we've looked at pipeline injection at a couple different facilities. It's certainly feasible. The tricky part is that the utilities that run the pipelines, they're a little, it's new, and there's not a lot of standardization as far as, you know, what can go in, and so it's an emerging area, and we're certainly open to it, you know, if that was something that was feasible here. Sure.
I'm wondering, this is actually sort of a question for the city. How does the 8 trucks per day compare to the landfill when it was open? How many trucks are coming in and out of an open landfill on a daily basis? Yes.
Right now, 50?
50. Okay.
No, you know what, it's less because of Duso.
Businesses dropped out.
I can.
Well, it's less down in our
But
area.
historically.
Yeah, historically,
Actually,
probably.
right now, there's,
I think
there's
one way to
we're
look at
having
it,
that many vehicles. in
I think
this
one way to
town.
look at it, they're talking about like a 40,000 ton per day facility.
Per
The
year.
landfill has a permit for 50,000 tons per year, I'm sorry. Tons per year, so just in terms of basic quantity of material being trucked in and out, it's about the same order of magnitude. The number of trucks they're talking about might be a little bit less than we see on a typical day. There probably would be more variation in the landfill operation than what they're doing, because they're looking at more of a consistent managed process than a landfill is. So I think the deliveries might be more consistent, and probably with a fewer less trucks than we've seen historically.
No, Diane,
Yeah, you had spoken about where other facilities were around here. Is there a facility that's comparable just in scale to what you would want here anywhere that you're running now?
I would say, with all these feedstocks, I mean, there's certainly digesters that are taking wastewater treatment plant sludge that are of comparable capacity.
But that you're running the Harvest Power?
The closest is London, Ontario.
Yeah.
Of similar size.
And that's a lot bigger, actually.
Yeah, there are, I
It
mean.
is bigger?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what amount of water is needed?
Oh, the good thing about, so, instead of using potable water, I mean, when this stuff comes in, you know, food waste looks like it's very high, it's solid material. You've got to add water and dilute it down and make a slurry so you can pump it around, so the biology like it. Instead of using potable water, what we usually do is we'll recycle processed water that we have internal and bring it back into loop. So we try to minimize our potable water usage as much as possible. For this size facility, I don't know off the top of my head how much water we use. But I think our approach would be to use water at first and then just keep recycling that material as much as we can. Because that stuff also has, the wastewater has soluble organic matter, COD in it, that we could still try and break down.
So Jim, does these kinds of projects require a permit from Mass DEP? And what regulations are they following? And who has oversight? Does the state have oversight of these operations?
The regulations and the permits are many, both on the state and local level for a project like this. So, yeah.
Is it through Mass DEP or some other agency?
It would be, well, the solid waste components to what would require DEP permits. Depending on the size of the facility, they might need to go through the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, which would be like an environmental impact report review type of process that they would need to go through, on permits for the process, permits for the distribution of the fertilizer, and probably several other permits that the DEP has.
So they might potentially have to do an environmental impact statement, and that would look at the impacts on the aquifer and the wetlands and other impacts there, the endangered species that's there. So that's an authorization to construct permit?
It depends on the feedstock, but it could be.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
I'm just curious how many jobs this plant creates.
From a construction point of view, to run it, it really doesn't take all that many people.
Right. For Orlando, we have 10 folks that would be full-time employed, but that's because there's a tax incentive that requires us to have X amount of people. For this type of facility, you can probably operate with 5 full-time, a manager, and then maybe an assistant manager, and then 3 operators.
Okay. So it's not a job for you?
Not so much.
It depends. You could have
Truck drivers, delivery.
Yeah, you've got the haulers, but they're in business now, so.
Well, it does add jobs indirectly through collection. It's a different process than what is currently, because if you imagine all your trash is going into one bin, or versus different haulers with different collection agencies. So there's some studies that have shown that there's some greater indirect job growth. To give you some idea of what it might be, it could be $18 to $24 million project. Quite a bit of that would end up regionally, because through construction and a lot of it's concrete, so that's ship that in. You would hire somebody local to do that. So.
Well, I want to thank David and Ian for coming and taking the time to make this presentation. I'm going to close this off. If the reuse committee wants to meet and debrief with Karen, I don't know if that's a possibility or
I'm
anything.
wondering if we should have a sign-in sheet with emails in case people want
That's
to
a
be
great
notified
idea.
of future meetings. So we just, sure. Maybe I'll just.
I'll hand it to you.
Okay, so any other comments or?
I did have a question, not to reopen it, but
Well,
we never really discussed the process before you receive it, and if there's a requirement I'm assuming there's a requirement for the citizens to separate it, and I'm wondering if that's mandatory,
Well,
be a citywide
it's
mandate.
a little complicated. There most likely will be a state organics ban, which means but that won't apply to residents, at least initially. It's going to be commercial and industrial. So the easiest thing at this point right now is to get, say, supermarkets and restaurants on board, and then if there's food processors, we know there's a Coca-Cola plant, things like that. What it allows the town to do at its own pace and discretion is to start doing residential collection and separation. But that isn't mandatory and probably won't be for at least a while anyway.
there's different tiers to the food waste we'll go after. I mean, the first tier is the easiest to come by, the low-hanging fruit, and that's from commercial, from say a supermarket that has off-spec material, or we want to grab that stuff in first before it's being used by consumers, because then it doesn't get sort of contaminated with silverware or plates or things. It doesn't end up as trash before it hits the trash sort of infrastructure. So that's what we're after first. And then as diversion programs progress and sort of separate organics from residential areas become an actual reality, then that'll be our next tier. But our first tier is the stuff that's produced before the consumers actually get a hold of it.
So going back to closing the meeting.
Yeah, I was just curious, in order to justify this kind of investment, what kind of arrangements you have with communities for how long you're going to contract with them to run the plant and so forth?
Well, the lease would come from the city, and so something like that would probably, at least we would prefer something around 20 years, but that's, again, up to the city as well. Contracts, say for energy with a utility company, are 10 to 20 years, called PPAs. Contracts for feedstock tend to be pretty short, just 1 to 3, because the kind of price, nobody wants to get locked